In building our nation and building businesses, we should have no fear to build the center of excellence for the use of leather in manufacturing in Kano. Why? Hide is in abundance in that neighborhood. The knowledge to prepare leather, to treat, to process has been going on in that part of the country for decades. We should have no problem putting investment behind that segment of industry with any Nigerian that comes from any part of this country who is interested in businesses related to that industry, having the liberty to freely move there, knowing he's within his nation. He is within his nation. Building the nation is critical to building our businesses. Ask Aliko Dangote where his businesses are. He gets it. He's a Nigerian. Okay, so he comes from Kano, but he has factories in Ogun State, setting up in Lagos State. He has in Kogi State. Anywhere the opportunity is, the good nose of a businessman should be able to smell it, and he should have the liberty to follow it, because we have first invested in building a nation. We're wasting resources right now in our division rather than investing resources in building a nation. We need to change the conversation. What I seek here this morning is a people, oh, in the afternoon now, this afternoon, is a people who no longer answer by their tribe, who no longer answer by their clan. Let me tell you how useless that function is. Is there a governor in any state of Nigeria that is from another state? Oh. Is there the chairman of any local government in Nigeria that is from another local government? Yes? In Lagos, okay. You know, Lagos is a bit of an abnormality, in a sense. Let's be honest, because the whole of Lagos is the whole of Nigeria. And Lagos seems to be a real microcosm of where we need to be, where we all can feel free to be all of who we are, without any fear or any favor. But in the rest of Nigeria, outside of Lagos, if the chairman of a local government is from the local government, if it's about tribe or tongue, why is his local government not the best in the world? Because after all, that's where he comes from. After all, they're his people. After all, the benefit is for his clan. But it hasn't worked. If it's the governorship of a state or the ability to deliver is about the fact that this person is your son of the soil, I'm sorry, that means that person is an indigene of that place. From where I come from in Nigeria, Badogel, that's how my people will say it. If it's about being a son of the soil, then you know that every governor that takes up the leadership of every state should deliver beyond excellence. Because it's his people, it's his state, it's where he comes from. He should have nothing but a desire and an aspiration to deliver value to his people. And if we get the Nigerian factor right, the guy who ever gets the privilege and the honor to be the president of the nation, not the president of any political party, because our politicians also get that wrong. The governor is the governor of his party in his state. The president can be the president of his political party in the country. Fa. During the campaign and the voting, party matters. Once you win the election, you have no party and you have nothing. You are the leader of a people, of the state or of the nation. Now, don't clap. Let me tell you exactly where I'm going. Because we are caught up in the wrong conversation of tribe or tongue rather than a nation. When we consider the people that should hold positions to deliver value to us as a people, we first consider national character. We first consider if his tribe also has been represented at the table, before we consider if the man is capable or competent. So at the end of the day, we get the third, the fourth, or the fifth-rate person in the position when we should have the best. Unfortunately for us, usually the best guy for the position is sitting around doing nothing, and we lose the value that we should get. Now, you can say these are politicians. No, this is about us, you and I. Because in our small lives, every day, we have also become masters of helping to build that. We do it in businesses. I'm an Igbo guy. Now I'm occupying a position. You have responsibility in that position to get the best people for the job. But I will deliberately create opportunities or advantages for my own people. What is that? My question to you this morning, which is the choice I have brought before you, is what choice do we want to make? Do we want to choose to build a nation? Or do we want to continue to divide a nation? Do we want to continue to deal with the tongues and the tribes? And maybe like Scotland, tomorrow one tribe will want its independence. And we already have some of those clamorings. But guess what? At the end of the day, business was a major part of the decision in England, in Scotland. Business was at the heart of a lot of the decisions. Because when the main businesses that create jobs and opportunities decided that if the answer is yes, they will move. When the chips are down, you have to take care of your stomach. When you understand that you are destroying value by division, then you understand there is value that must be created in unity. A country of 170 million smart, dynamic, driven people is totally different from Ibibio land, I don't know the population, or Igbira land, I do not know the population. Or even some of the tribes, you don't know their names. You've never heard it before. But there are people that will die fighting for that tribe, or people that will use religion to divide us. Mark the word I said, use religion to divide us. Because if you understand who God is, in the name of God, nobody can do the things that are being done in his name. And so when Shegun was talking, comparing the Nigerian and the Ghanaian, as said by a Ghanaian president, in fact, it's a minor explanation for who we are. The difference between who a Nigerian is and who many other people from other nations are. But the reality is, until we ourselves collectively bring together the advantages that we possess. All the tribes have something different that they bring to the table. Our people have different strengths and advantages that they bring to the table. When we answer the right question of what we want, do you want to be an Ibadan girl like me forever? Or do you want to be a great Nigerian? Because the real answer is in what we choose to do. Because based on the answer that we give, our actions have to be different. The things we're doing right now does not support what we say we seek. You can't achieve what you want. You can't achieve what you want if you are doing what you shouldn't be doing. Right now, from government to people, we're dividing ourselves daily. If you walk out of here today, and every time anybody asks you who you are, you remember to say, I'm a Nigerian. And you understand the meaning of that. What does it mean to be a Nigerian? It means that as a Nigerian, and I am a Nigerian, and I love my country, because there is a great country in Nigeria. There is a people with energy and dynamism like never seen before. There is drive and creativity like many nations will die for. There's talent and abundance of it. There is entrepreneurial drive that can deliver value like some can never even imagine. And God, in his own right, did overwork concerning Nigeria. Put in more than we can ever need. He gave to us. So don't ever say, where is this God with a country like this? The question is, where are these people that have been given so much? What have they done with what they have been given? What are the questions we're asking? And in asking those questions, what choices are we making? When we choose right, when we choose the day we arrive at the final destination of the fact that we want to build a nation, and we develop the ideology of the nation that we want to build, a place where peace and respect will reign, a place where the least of us will be taken care of in order to protect the best of us, a place where there will be fairness and justice, a place where the best of our talents will be allowed to express themselves no matter where they come from, a place where we will seek to create value across all boards, a place where we will join hands without caring who is sitting at the throne, as long as the guy who is there is qualified to be there, and he has the capacity to give what will create value for every Nigerian. The responsibility is for you and I to continue to ask ourselves every day, the things that you do daily, is it building or dividing?